For many entrepreneurs, the business starts as an extension of the founder. Their instincts, their values, their voice, their judgment, their way of making decisions. And in the early days, that can be one of the company's greatest strengths. The founder sees things others do not see. The founder protects the customer experience. The founder knows what feels right, what feels wrong, and what the brand is supposed to stand for. But what happens when the business starts to grow? What happens when the team expands, the decisions multiply, and every important question still has to be run through the founder? At some point, the very thing that helped launch the company can become the thing that limits its growth. Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to The Reluctant Entrepreneur. Today, we're talking about founder dependency, brand identity, and how entrepreneurs can build companies that remain human, authentic, and aligned without requiring the founder to personally hold every piece together. My guest today is Charlie Birch, founder of Humanize Collective. Charlie helps founder-led businesses turn instinct into clarity, personality into purpose, and founder vision into a brand that can be understood, shared, and protected by the entire organization. My conversation with Charlie begins right now. Stick around. Charlie Birch, welcome to the program. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and it's always interesting to sit on the other side of your own introduction. So thank you
I
for
know,
all
right?
of your
Well,
accolades.
well, of course. Well, it's easy to write accolades when someone is. I tend to make up words. You're accoladable. So there, that's the world according to Mike. You might hear a few of those today. And I know it is unusual for you to sit on this side of the microphone because you also host a podcast. You and Laurel Carpenter are co-hosts on the Breaking the Bottleneck podcast. Do I have that right?
Yes, the podcast, we launched it last August, and the first season ran through the beginning of this year, and we're regrouping now and changing our production staff a little bit around because turns out I wanted to be the bottleneck of my own podcast, so I had to get some better systems in place.
You know,
And
they say
we will hopefully
the
be
cobbler's kids have no shoes, right? The roofer's roof
right.
leaks, the plumber's plumbing leaks. So we're never a prophet in our own home. Um, so well, before we get into your podcast, your business, Humanize Collective, let's kind of rewind the clock and go back in time. What was the path that you took into entrepreneurship? What did you do before you made that crazy, insane decision to jump into the deep end of the cold pool of entrepreneurship? And then let's get to how you started Humanize Collective. So let's kind of start before that, and then we'll march toward the current time.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is actually in dance performance, choreography and dance performance, and psychology. So I was pursuing a master's degree in dance therapy in Boulder, Colorado, when I realized that despite being really interested in the subject matter, I didn't really want to set my life up around a private practice or working in a psychiatric facility. I didn't want to have to get a state license and pick a place. I just wasn't ready for that kind of permanence. And so I dropped out of grad school and was kind of I don't know what I'm going to do. And one of my friends said, there's this thing going on this week called Startup Week in Boulder. They need volunteers to work the door. Why don't you come do that? And I was like, all right. So I went to Techstars Startup Week and heard this, oh, entrepreneurship. And I was listening to all these different, startup founders talk about, I had an idea. I started a project. I figured out how to get paid to do my project. It's I could do that. So I just started thinking of what ideas I had that I, would leverage all the different interests and skills that I had, and got a bunch of gig jobs on the side that gave me a lot more behind the scenes business skills as I was trying to grow then a coaching practice. So I had a coaching practice that was oriented around burnout prevention. I quickly learned that people don't buy prevention. I pivoted to I pivoted to a in-person retreat company for remote teams when remote work was just starting to kind of take off as a fringe way. And I was nervous personally about the loss of human connection in the workplace, but I was excited about remote work. So I had two co founders on that project, one with a background in event planning, one with travel, and then my learning and development, human potential background. And we were going to design really thoughtful, engaging retreats for remote teams. That team imploded because of personality mismatches. And then I had a website design business for that was probably my longest running venture. And I was working predominantly with like mom and pop brick and mortar shops that were interested in tapping into online revenue and wanted to do more of like a brick and click business model. So I was helping them to figure out how do we translate what's working in person to what will work online without it feeling like two separate businesses, which is when I started kind of dipping my toe back into the psychology and started working in the brand space. And then eventually I realized I enjoyed the brand work a lot more than I did the technical website work. And so while we still, as a collective, we still offer website design as one of the expressions of brand, my role day to day is more about the identity architecture and figuring out how to tease the founder's role apart or the founder's identity apart from the business, um, so that all the team members can embody the brand with the same degree of confidence and clarity that the founder does, and ownership. The whole team can take ownership for the growth of the business and the brand over time. So it was definitely a ball of yarn, a windy ball of
That-
yarn.
That's a very large ball of
Um,
yarn. Yes, yeah.
yeah.
Well, Charlie, I can't think of a better educational background that could be any more appropriate for business than dance, choreography, and psychology. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm kind of serious about that. They're starting a business, running a business, any business. There's a lot of choreography going on, and it may not be dance, it may not be pretty, but there is an immense amount of choreography going on. You're
Yes.
uh, a combination of a dancer, a juggler, a street performer, a comedian, a mime. I mean, all of those theatrical skills, I think, have a place in business. And then also psychology. My God, I mean, I needed a psychologist, just for figuring out why I started a business and the emotional toll it takes, the pull it takes, the numerous masters we serve as a business owner, contrary to what people think, business owners' life is immense. So I think those skills that you had, the training that you had, really are a very valuable prerequisite to running a business. I see so many similarities there and parallels. You've described being raised by two workaholic entrepreneur parents. That probably explains the very large ball of yarn that you just went through. How did watching that? How did watching your workaholic entrepreneurial parents shape the kind of business owner you wanted to become, or maybe the type of business owner you didn't want to become? It may have shaped you
Yeah.
positively and negatively.
Both both things are definitely true. I had a kind of informal high school reunion recently that I went to, and one of my friends who I hadn't seen in 25 years, he's like, "What have you been up to?" I said, "Oh, I've just been really figuring out how to never have to get a job." And like that's what I've been doing for the past 25 years. So my parents were business partners. They owned with one other founder a management consulting firm in the healthcare space out of DC, government contract world. Um, and they had a tremendous employee base. My dad traveled all the time because they did government contracts outside of the United States as well. So he was often in the Middle East and parts of Asia. And this is, of course, like before FaceTime, before cell phones, like we had a globe that sat on in our dining room, and we would kind of just put pins in where we thought he
Where's
was,
Dad?
and he would
Yeah,
come home. Yeah,
yeah.
he's always right here where this red pin is, right? And my mom, so he was the front man and the salesman, and he did all the schmoozing and getting of the contracts. And then my mom was the behind the scenes person who figured out how to fulfill all the outrageous promises that my dad made uh, to his clients. And so, part of that informed, I think, my willingness to trust that I could just kind of make up my own version of reality. But truthfully, until I started identifying myself as an entrepreneur, like I didn't really have that language. I didn't really think about my parents as entrepreneurial. It's not like it wasn't part of
It
my,
was just normal, right? I mean, that
yeah, that was just like they worked for themselves and they ran a business, and um they were really, really busy all the time. Like really, really busy. My mom tells a story about one day she was walking down the beach and she saw this flock of seagulls, and they started to kind of run and they started to flap their arms. So she started to run and she started to flap her arms. And she literally started to burst into tears when she realized she couldn't take off and fly away with the seagulls. And that was the moment when she was like, oh, I am so busy. I am so stressed out. I just like lost the plot and thought I could fly away with the seagulls. And, she was paying someone to water her plants, paying someone to do her grocery shopping, paying someone to buy the Christmas presents for us. Also, she could be available to do the work for her business.
yeah.
And so, as a young person, I absorbed a lot of those behaviors of just constant doing and busyness. And that took a toll on my health. And when I finally figured out like what was going on with my health, I was able to back out of it a little bit and realize, oh, like I'm in a chronic stress response like all the time. And so all of those things kind of compounded to create a situation where I didn't want to give over control of my time to somebody else. So being a business owner, despite it not being like this sit by the pool with your laptop thing that, passive income. I played with the passive income thing. Like I have investments and everything, but the idea of having a business where I have no relationship with my clients, no interfacing with my market, like I tried that whole online coaching business thing. That wasn't for me. I like to have a relationship with my customers, but at the end of the day, like the ends for me, the ends can never justify the means. Like I'm want to operate in integrity, and part of my integrity is being home at dinner with my family, being present for my children, making
Mm.
sure I'm healthy, having a good night's sleep, you know, being a likable, knowable human being. Right? And those are
Not
some
the
of the things
crazy
that like
woman that's running a business that's flying after
yeah,
seagulls. Right, right, right. I get it.
yeah, right. And and it's a challenge because there's so much messaging in our culture about the hustle culture and the grind and the grit and all of that. And, it's really about for me enjoying the ride as much as I think I'm going to enjoy the destination. Cause like, you don't really know where you're going to end up. You
Yeah,
might end up where you want to end up, but at the end of the day, like your life is the moments that you walk through.
yeah.
And if that's not good enough, then what are we doing?
You hit a couple of things that resonate with me. One, the latest thing you said about the journey rather than destination. I'm big on the journey. I always thought it was about destination, and I realize that the closer I think I'm getting to the destination just moves a little farther away. Not that I'm not accomplishing a goal, but it's a lifelong education,
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. And I think that's true to any profession, whether you're a dancer or a singer, performer, or actor, carpenter, plumber. You just get better and better and better at your craft, and you reevaluate what success is, and all of that. Um, I think it is all about the journey, and the journey is over when there's nothing left to learn. And I think for mere mortals like us, that means the journey is never over until we're over, right? So,
Right.
and I enjoy the journey. I almost, part of me doesn't, I'm not excited to get to a destination because I'm totally enjoying the ride. It's like watching a great movie or listening to a great concert. It's like you don't want it to be over, right? You
Yeah.
want to be in the moment. The other thing you'd mentioned is how busy your mother was. Hiring someone to water plants and all that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs mistake or confuse busyness with productivity and success. And
Absolutely.
I remember being so busy. We didn't have any money when I started my company 34 years ago. In the early days, we never had any money. I was always chasing cash. I was building my own Ponzi scheme where I was both the Bernie Madoff character and the victim. I was feeding my own sense of upside down value just to cover payroll,
Absolutely.
right? And and I remember worrying, stressing about the finances, but feeling some kind of comfort in the fact that I'm busy.
Right.
It could only be worse if I ran out of money and wasn't busy in my mind. And I realized that staying busy was a coping mechanism. It comforted me, even though it fed into the cash flow issues that we were having because I was busy just doing things that did not ultimately take me to the final destination, right? It just kept me in this hamster wheel. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that you've experienced that. You've probably watched your parents, I'm guessing, see some of that, and maybe the clients that you work with that you've coached over the years. I think that's a familiar wash, rinse, repeat kind of thing with entrepreneurs. You you talk about the founder-led growth ceiling. I think that's a phrase that you cite. What does that mean, and how does the founder know when they bump their head against that ceiling?
Yeah. So I don't want to like proclaim that I've coined it, but I think I coined it.
I
Maybe
coin
somebody else
phrases
has,
all the time that I find out
maybe
have already
somebody
been
else has
coined.
said it too.
Yeah,
Right, right. So it's just
yeah,
a collective consciousness. But to me, it's like, historically, I've worked with a lot of solo founders and a lot of founders who are really the only leadership in the business where the people who work for them all work under them and there's not like a C-suite or something of that nature. And one of the things I've found is, of course, you need momentum in order to scale your business. And when you're the person who's doing all of the decisions that allow movement to happen, there's only so much momentum that you can accumulate, right? That you can generate. And so maybe it's more like actually more like a wall than a ceiling. But if you're looking at like the trajectory of growth being like an upward graph, right? Like there's a point where you just can't grow anymore
right.
because you're just in this constant feedback loop, right? And
Yeah,
there's a place where you need to start hiring some fractional support that can be trusted to make some decisions without you. There's a point where you need to have more customer facing team members that you can trust are going to, not only just give enough shits, excuse my language,
yeah,
about the customer experience to show up with the same caliber that you would, but are going to pay enough attention to the details to create the same experience that you would. And that is one of the things I see a lot is that people get kind of stuck in this like, well, I'm not going to delegate because delegation just creates more work. It's just different work. It's not less work because they don't really know how to set good expectations and articulate what they actually expect and want from their people because they're operating so much on instinct and intuition, which what you said in the beginning is like it's useful to be able to create your own momentum, to have that instinct and intuition. But when you need other people to start running beside you, generating that same momentum, you don't want to be dragging them along by a rope. You want them to understand the same logic that you have. But those things that happen instinctively, those things that happen intuitively, people often don't have explicit access and awareness of what those are. And so they make a lot of assumptions when they delegate. They make a lot of assumptions when they're managing expectations, and they have a hard time truly articulating the right things. And that's one of the things that we really specialize in, is helping to extract that unconscious kind of intuitive layer and make it more visible and more explicit so it can be transferred as into collective logic.
Interesting. I have to go back to something you said earlier. You said, "Oh, sorry for the language," or referencing swearing. I think that in addition to choreography and psychology and dance, swearing is a prerequisite talent that one has to get, because if you don't have it going into entrepreneurship, you will definitely pick it up along the road, right? There's a million reasons to express choice words when you're building a business. We've all learned new ones and new ways to implement them too. But at least that's been my experience. Many founders build their companies around their instincts. I think that is uniquely an entrepreneurial trait. Their instincts, their judgments, their personality, they are the business. At what point does that strength, because I do believe it's a strength, particularly in the early days of launching a business, at what point does that strength become a limitation?
Well, I think there's 2 points that I really see. And actually, we had a guest, Terry Maxwell, on our podcast who runs a company called ShiftCo. She works with purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are
I've
looking to
talked to
scale
her.
their business.
I've talked to her on this
Yeah,
show. Yeah.
yeah, she's great. So she talks about this idea of the fulcrums when the business is, tipping from one phase to the other. And that conversation gave me a lot of clarity about, like, these are the 2 points where I really see people struggle. So um, the founder has been working solo and they have essentially reached their capacity. They just cannot make more things happen, not let alone faster or bigger. They just literally can't do it all themselves anymore, and they need to start delegating. But as I was kind of alluding to, they start to delegate, and instead of doing the original work, they just have this just bottomless review cycle. And then it's like, well, I'm not doing the work, but I'm redoing the work.
Right.
Like that moment when you're really wanting to hire like an online business manager or a VA who's going to have, really some serious responsibilities, or you're going to hire a social media management company to create content and engage with your audience for you, or when you're really trying to take something off your plate as a part of your role and give it to somebody else to take ownership over, and the results coming back to you are just not good enough. And there's a difference between, I think, not me enough and not good enough, right? And
Mm.
people kind of get stuck
Yeah.
in that. And that's why I think it's really important to be able to, just like you can say, okay, this is the way I show up personally at a dinner party with friends, and this is the way I show up personally at a dinner party with my grandparents. Like, there's a cohesion, hopefully there's a through line there, and you're not like, just
Yeah.
totally
Jekyll
all
and
over the
Hyde.
place.
Yeah.
But right, but there's a know your audience and understand your role in a given context. And I think a lot of founders are really enmeshed with their business identity, and so they don't really understand where they start and where the business stops. And when it
Yeah.
comes time to start giving away some of those roles, it can actually feel kind of like scary, right? To
Yeah.
like let somebody else make decisions, because it triggers all this stuff about authenticity and your own identity. But I think also um, there's a point where you really need to become the CEO, and there needs to be a CFO, and there needs to be a CMO, and right, when you're scaling the leadership team, that's the other point where I think it's really important to be able to tease yourself apart from the business and say, like, this is who I am, this is who the business is, and to understand those intersections so that everybody can understand the instinct and intuition of the business.
Right.
Because otherwise, and especially on the front end, when you have that like solo person, and on the very back end, when you have the leadership team, you have the personal agenda and the company agenda, and the personal comfort zone doesn't always match what the company needs. And if you're not able to say, this is me, this is the business, the chance of making reactive, impulsive decisions and having it feel like instinct and intuition is very high.
You talk about shared logic, and I think it was in the context of um, how founders can turn instinct into shared logic. Is that when you say that the team needs to look at the instinct of the business rather than just the founder? Is that kind of is that transfer what you refer to as shared logic, or is that something different?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we have a tool, the brand IDQ framework that I developed, which is um, based in Jungian psychology, which is my psychology background. But also Jungian archetypes have like an existing application in marketing and branding. So it's like kind of just an evolution of that. But we have a process through which we basically ask founders a series of reflective questions about how they want their business to be perceived in the marketplace. And then from there, we can kind of back up to like, okay, if that's how you want your business to be perceived, then likely these are the core values you hold. Likely these are the kind of world views that you hold. Likely these are some habits that you would want to like regularly engage with in order to activate the type of energy that's going to give that impression. So essentially, we reverse engineer. And what happens a lot of times is you'll see like you have a vision for your business, and you're really like your whole somatic situation, your whole nervous system lights up, right? When you have a vision, and you can kind of feel it, and you can smell it, and you can taste it. But for everybody else, it's just a narrative, right? And
Right.
there's no physical experience of it. And so, what we need to do is kind of reverse engineer, who do our people need to be now to go do and arrive here. So, one of my mentors, he talks a lot about in the West, we have a do go be, which is that the means as justify the ends, right? It's like I'm gonna do it, and then I'm going to be where I want to be, which is that obsession with the ending that we talked about.
Yeah.
But if you're going to realize your vision, you have to become the person who realized that vision before you can walk to that vision, right? And so founders have an ability to sort of do that instinctively, but their team members are guessing at it most of the
Right.
time, and like operating with big holes in their thing. So that's what we try to figure out is like, okay, this is who the business is, and this is what informs that. These are the pieces of identity. And I actually just had a great conversation with a colleague of mine who's a Broadway actor, and we talked about character development. You know, there's a lot of conversation in the branding and marketing space, which I think are two different spaces. They hang out together a lot, but that
They're drinking buddies.
about yeah, about customer persona, but we don't really talk as much about brand persona and the pieces. Like if you could really go through a customer persona and think about the psychographics and demographics that you put, the layers that you put and of attention you put to that, and then think about the fact that we flatten brand, which is the identity of the business, to a mood board. It's very just, out of out of
Yeah.
whack.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do is understand the psyche of the business in the same way you would want to understand the psyche of your customer.
Yeah. I would think that as a founder, particularly in the early days of my business, much of my identity was, transferred into the business. It's like DNA, right? It's my DNA in the business. which makes it really difficult to separate the two, um, psychologically anyway. I mean, we do it as
Yes.
parents all the time, right? Our children
Absolutely.
have our DNA, yet they are not us. They have their own identity. But in business, for some reason, I think we don't see it that way. We don't see that our personality is in the business, but the business is not us, right? They're two separate
Mm-hmm.
things. And I think that a lot of business owners feel that if they do separate it, then somehow the business will become generic or sterile or not authentic. Um, how do you guide founders through that realization that at some point you got to let the kid go, right? At some point, you the kid's got your personality, it's got your DNA, it knows how it's been raised, and it needs to develop a personality and a journey of its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you walk founders through that? We are very, and you're one of us, so you know firsthand, we are very stubborn people. It is quite the
Yes.
world according to Charlie, the world according to Mike, right? So how do you manage to herd the cats over to that side of the logic?
So, I mean, I love a good parenting metaphor. And I always am saying to my clients, just as a child is of you, it's not you. Your business is of you, but it's not you. And I mean, it's easy to say, I am more than my business, but sometimes it's hard to say my business is more than me. But like if one of those things is true, the other has to be true also. And then your brand is the comes to life in all the spaces between the people that are required for it to run. So the space between you and your business is part of your brand. The space between you and your customer is actually the space between you and your business and the customer, right?
Right.
Because they're perceiving both of those things. They're perceiving you and they're also perceiving the business. And so I think a lot of this work is really just about creating more space, which is inherently requires you to slow down
Yeah.
and not the most popular opinion in this particular state of the world. But I think, especially right now, um, we have a lot of conversation about personal brand is very much up, right? Like everyone's talking about the personal brand. And even you see in larger organizations with very established company brands, you're seeing the emergence of the executive personal brand in a way that you haven't seen in the past. And so, like, to be able to point to, some of the companies that have really stood the test of time for better or worse and say, look, like, what are your five favorite brands that you buy from? Like, maybe you have Patagonia or Lego or like these ones that you really know. You go to Target, like, you don't know the person who's in charge of Target. You don't have a
Right.
personal relationship with those people, but you do have a personal relationship with the business. It's not a human to human relationship, but it has an impact on your humanity. When you feel seen and heard as a customer, you like being a customer. And when you don't feel seen and heard as a customer, you're upset, and you feel betrayed. You feel let down and disappointed. So it's really, I think, to kind of get it away from how do I make my business successful right now? Okay, and what do I want it to grow to? And look at those examples of businesses that are where you want to be and start to look at how the leadership has its own identity from the business and how the business has its own identity from the leadership is an important exercise. But I think it's also really important to remember that all in this digital marketing, especially with social media, there's so much pressure to be the figurehead of your brand on those platforms because businesses can't be addicted to social media, but people can be addicted to social media. And so all the narrative around what works on social is based on an algorithm that wants people
Yes.
to be
Yes.
dependent on the
On the
channel. You know what I
yes,
mean? So it's
exactly.
like so many people kind of back out of like, well, I have to market my business on social media. I have to be successful on social media. So I have to design my entire brand around what works on social media. And that's not the whole picture. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that and to name that too, that um, you want to think about what's really in the best interest of you and your business first. And then you want to think about what's going to perform well on the channels that you choose to show up on, which may not be social media at all. Like you could just be a trade show person for the rest of it. You could be networking and trade shows. And like then
Yeah.
you need a totally different strategy, you know? So
Sure. I think one of the best examples I can think of a business founder that has a very, very strong personality, but has managed to separate to a certain degree the person from the personality, yet get the personality woven into all the businesses that he owns, and that would be Richard Branson from Virgin
mhm.
Group. You know, he's crazy. He's this, you know, '60s era Austin Powers, shagalicious playboy, you know, that very could be viewed as very misogynistic viewed today, but that's his style, jumping out of hot air balloons and doing crazy things. He used to run his companies, and then he lost a few of them. He has upwards of 100 different companies, of which he runs, in terms of running the company, zero. He puts in executive teams, yet the brand is still very much Richard Branson's crazy personality, but the companies are solely separate from that. I'm still there. Sure, I'm still sure that they are subject to, if he does something illegal, highly immoral, big scandal, that will stain, Virgin Atlantic or Virgin
Yeah.
Mobile or Virgin Trains or all the different Virgin things he has. But I think that when I'm flying on Virgin Atlantic, I don't think my captain is up there having sex with the stewardess, right?
Right.
Which I would think
Right.
if that were Richard Branson, that would be a possibility. So I think that's a good example of someone who has inserted the DNA of the personality and the vibe, but has hands off in terms of running the company, letting the right people with the right skills make the right decisions from a corporate standpoint, and just kind of skate on the Branson vibe. Does that
Yes.
land
Yes.
in your world? Yeah.
It
I,
does. It makes me think, I have a colleague who is a positive psychologist and executive coach, and she's German, I believe, or I believe she's German. If she's not actually German, she speaks German. And she told me one time, she said, in German, we don't say I feel happy. We say I have happiness or I experience happiness, and I think
mm,
in the English language, we really identify with our feelings and our behaviors, and we don't have that space between this is me and these are my ideas, this is me and these are my feelings, this is me and these are my impulses. It's just we kind of just like happen all over the place.
yeah.
And so I think again creating that space between yourself and the business to be able to see like what is you and what is the crystallization of an idea you had, not an idea you are. And I think it gets even trickier when you're talking about like service based businesses where the founder is doing like the delivery through their physical being, and is having those relationships. I think it's easier for people when it's a product based business and there's that inherent um, differentiation that happens. But I think it's really important Not just even if you don't want to scale your business. I think it's just really important to be able to have healthy boundaries with your work, and to decouple your worth from your business success, I think is really, really important for the well being of the people in the community.
Yeah, I agree. We're almost out of time, so just a couple more questions. Breaking the Bottleneck podcast. What made you start that? What's the goal of that podcast?
That podcast is eventually will still be. Um, the goal was to showcase the entrepreneurial journeys of high integrity entrepreneurs who didn't let the ends justify the means, who decided, I'm going to do things right or I'm not going to do them. I'm going to truly march to the beat of my own drum and not allow the pressures of corruption to eat my soul for breakfast. To tell those stories and then to also help identify, what really gave them the confidence in their own vision and clarity of direction to move against a social current that often tells us to compromise ourselves in the name of success. Um, and we picked that cohort of guests because I believe that that's my ideal client is a high integrity founder who wants to scale their business. And so my thinking was let's interview the people who have done the thing that our clients want to do and understand the challenges and also give our audience like some confidence that it can be done, and in the process kind of understand better how we can support in that process by hearing those stories and saying, oh yeah, that's a place where I really think like the work we do would have been helpful or is really relevant, and then we can use that as almost like some research for how to improve our services and be more useful to our audience.
And speaking of support, the Humanized Collective, your business, what type of support does that provide your clients? Is it a coaching firm? It is a mastermind? Is it virtual? Is it in person? Tell me just a little bit about, in my
Sure.
audience, a little
So
bit about your business.
Humanized Collective is a brand consultancy. So we specialize in founder-led brands, in the service space, specifically co-founder brands and in-person experience-based brands. So we work with founders, like I've been saying, to extract their instinct and intuition, help them articulate that better, really create a full psychographic profile of the brand as its own personality, and then figure out okay, how does that show up in the marketplace? Is it showing up the way you intend? Kind of course correct when it's not, standardize the things that are already happening that are working, and then provide ongoing support, to take some of the approval process and oversight of the brand governance off the plate of the founder. That's at the point where I kind of step in as a fractional CBO and review the work that everyone's doing. The other thing we do, which is unique from a lot of branding services, is that we look at the application of brand or the expression of brand, not just through marketing, but through customer service, through sales, through operational design, so that the whole, is essentially brand as the other side of the culture coin. Um, and making sure that the working environment is going to make it really organic for the people to express the brand because they're essentially living the experience themselves instead of just kind of plastering it on top of whatever project management software was cheapest that month,
Right, right.
So it's I would say identity architecture and then activation is our area of expertise.
That's awesome. And finally, last question. how did you define success when you started your first gig way back in the day? And how do you define it today?
When I had my first business, I was really just trying to avoid having to get a job, and I really hadn't thought. Well, that's, let's
That's
see.
like
So
saying, I
I
don't
was
want to get
trying
wet,
to,
but I'm going to dive
yeah,
into the ocean, you
yeah.
know?
No, I know it's so ridiculous when you say, but I was trying to avoid getting a job that made me feel I had more to offer. A lot of the jobs that I was looking at was like, okay, that utilizes like one of my skills, but not my other skills. So my metric of success in those days was like, do I feel like many parts of my ball of yarn can be transferred and useful here, right? Um, and nowadays, I would say that still applies. And I'm actually having like a very full circle moment where I feel like a lot of the things I thought I had kind of moved away from are circling back around. But, like, can I support my family? I have two kids and a husband and a dog, can I support my family in a way that feels worthy of celebration?
Hmm.
Can I do it while I'm healthy and still have time for my family? Like, we sit down and have dinner every night at 5 o'clock. And that means sometimes I don't get to go to all the like networking mixers that maybe I should go to. Um,
I
but
like
I'm
that.
not going
I
to fiddle the,
should. For my
I should
listening
go
for my
to.
listening audience, should was in air quotes.
Yeah. So, it's like the metric of success obviously has to include financial viability.
Sure.
Um, but I just connected with a really brilliant man recently who uh, has a company called The Living Organization. And he said in his book, which I loved and had never heard exactly, money is feedback, profit is feedback. It's not the purpose. And so to me, I really resonated with that because I feel like so much we think the purpose of business is to make money, and the things like that's the metric of success for so many people, or maybe they've tricked themselves into thinking that again should be the metric of success, when
Yeah.
actually the profitability of your business is feedback that the purpose of your business is being validated, right? And
Yeah.
so I want to run a purposeful business that provides financial viability for my family and also allows me to be the best mother, as quality and quantity of parenting and friendship and family membering that I can, because at the end of the day, I think humanity is more worthy of celebration than.
Yeah. I agree with your comment. It's spot on from my perspective that financial numbers are really, you didn't use this word, but I interpreted it as like a scorecard on
Mhm.
it's the result of. It's not what we chase. When we chase it, we get it, but it's not the same. It's not fulfilling. It's not enough. I spent years chasing certain goals, and when I realized that I can achieve all those goals by just chasing good decisions, the
Mhm.
the rest come as authentically as they're supposed to in the right proportions.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if I chase any one of them, I accomplish it. I get it at the expense of 10 others, right? So,
Right.
so and I had this, it took me a lot of years to figure out, okay, Mike, forget the financial goals, all the stuff that, and I'm going to do the air quotes now, what the bankers expect, give me your forecast for 2026. You imagine what the look on their face when we have a new banker and I tell them we don't have one. Like, there's no place on my form, no checkbox that says they don't know, right? You just throw something
Yeah.
out there. So I just make up a number, but just to keep them happy. But really, we just concentrate on making the best decisions that we can possibly make based on our level of skill and insight and intuition and all of that. And then we look at the numbers and go, okay, well, we've made some good decisions, but some could be better. And then we go back and work on the decisions, not the scorecard, right? And
Yep.
It's like when you're golfing. I'm the worst person to give golf analogies because I'm not a real fan of golf. But when you have a poor score at the end of a round, you might go work on your swing.
Right.
You don't try and fix the score. You try and improve your game. And to me, that's you said it better than I'm saying it. I'm just reiterating in my dorky way what you already said. But for my audience, I'll stop talking now because I'm just kind of circling now. For my audience who would like to get more information on Humanize Collective, the URL will be in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, just look down here where it says see more, and that URL will be there, as will a link to the podcast that Charlie and her podcast co-host Laurel, right? Laurel Carpenter, have put together. They interview guests, much like I'm interviewing Charlie, and including the guests that Charlie had referenced earlier that both of us had interviewed. There's a lot of good insight in those podcasts, and Charlie and Laurel do a good job as hosts and co-hosts on that show. So if you want information there, just look at the show notes. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, don't do it while you're driving. We don't want to lose any subscribers, not that way. When it's safe to do so, look at the show notes on your favorite podcast app, and all that information will be there as well. Charlie Birch, Humanize Collective, thank you so much for being my guest today. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I love talking with you. And one great thing about hosting the show, and you probably experience this with yours too, is I feel like sometimes I'm stealing candy from babies because I do this for the benefit of my audience, air quotes, but I am the one that really gets most of the benefit out of it. And even after all these decades I've had in business, it's amazing to know that there's still a lot of room to learn. And my dad, an immigrant to the United States, he's not with us anymore, and he could never be accused of being a motivational speaker. That would be the last thing he would be able to do. He used to instill in me, son, you learn your whole life and you still die stupid. I'm like,
no.
Okay, well, that's not exactly going to be on a Hallmark card, or a success poster. But I got his point in that, just when you think you know it all, the universe, the business, I like to call the business gods. The business gods have a way of going, oh yeah, let me just turn your life upside down and see what you know now. Thank you for educating me and my audience. I really appreciate it. And I just wish you nothing but continued success in your journey.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure to be here. And I hope your listeners garner some value from our conversation.
I am absolutely certain they will. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, here are some final thoughts. Charlie's work points to a challenge almost every founder eventually faces. In the beginning, the founder is often the business. The founder makes the decisions, protects the quality, shapes the customer experience, and carries the culture. But growth changes the equation. A business that cannot function without the founder may be personable, passionate, and even successful, but it may not yet be scalable. The lesson here is not that founders should remove themselves from their companies. It is that they must translate what they know, believe, and instinctively do into something others can understand, apply, and protect. A healthy brand shouldn't lose its humanity as it grows, but it also shouldn't require the founder to personally hold every piece together. Now, that's a wrap. Thanks for being part of our Reluctant Entrepreneur family. We've been very busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, so be sure to subscribe and get notified when new episodes drop. If you're an entrepreneur or know someone who would make a great guest, we'd love to hear from you. Visit reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com, where you can apply or recommend a guest or just learn a little bit more about the show. And a couple of shameless plugs. I've started a new series under the Reluctant Entrepreneur brand. The new series is called Reluctant Lessons, where businesses went wrong. On this series, we dig into high-profile business failures and the story behind it all. So far, we've profiled Rubbermaid, Kodak, Blockbuster, BlackBerry, the DeLorean Motor Company, Toys R Us, and many, many more to come. There's really no shortage. Check those and other episodes out on this channel. And if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and as an audiobook on both Audible and Amazon. And to everyone listening or watching, if you find yourself stepping into entrepreneurship, whether by choice or by circumstance, remember this: sometimes the path we never planned becomes the journey we were meant to take. Thank you all so much for being here. I truly appreciate all of you, and I'll see you again very soon.